Hello, I'm Sean Paul with Morning Star Missions. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching our video series on how to become a full-time missionary. You know, our prayer is that these become a massive blessing to you and get you started right in the mission field. If you want to contact me, feel free to do so. My email address is in the description of this YouTube video. If you want to network with fellow missionaries, we also have a link there to our Facebook group. Please join. We would love to have you. Make sure you subscribe to this channel because we're definitely going to be adding a lot more content in the future. And then the final note is that this video series is based off a book by the name of Pursuing the Call. The author is Daniel Lamastra, and he's a full-time missionary in El Salvador. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, Danny, welcome back again. Today, we're going to be talking about preparing for full-time missions. This is actually an excerpt from your book. So we're just going to kind of break that down and chew on that a little bit. Make sure everybody knows Pursuing the Call is the book you wrote. And that's really the basis of this whole entire outline and actually the inspiration of these training videos. So welcome again. Hope you're doing good today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Well, okay. So, preparing for full-time missions, anybody that's been in the mission field, we definitely have memories of doing that. I remember being on a high of, preparing for the missions. And then the night before, we sold everything. We were living on a mattress in our house. We didn't have anything in our home. And I was like, all of a sudden it just hit me. What did I just do? So anyway, I'm sure we all have our different experiences, but I've been here on the field 8 years now and never looked back. So it doesn't bother me now. But that night, I just had that one blinking moment of going, what did I do? Did I just make a biggest mistake in my life? So anyway, man, so talk to us. Tell us about, preparing for full-time missions.
Yeah. So when I was first starting to think about the idea of missions, one of the things I mentioned in another video is that I grew up in a church that had a lot of missionaries coming through very frequently. And so I was exposed to missions from a young age. I was aware of missions, and I had an interest in missions as I was starting to think about what do I want to do with my life and think about colleges and things like that. And my whole concept of what it meant to prepare for missions at that point in time was you have to go to a Bible college and you have to get a degree in missions. And that's what it means to prepare for missions. And what I came to realize over time is that that is a really limited view of what it means to prepare for missions. In fact, we may talk about the academic type, the ways that you could prepare academically for missions at some point later on in this video. But I would even go so far as to guess that most missionaries probably don't even have a degree in missions from a Bible college. I don't have any statistics to back that up, but I just know with the missionaries that I know personally, most do not have a degree in missions. I actually did not end up getting a degree in missions either. And so when we talk about what it means to prepare for missions, it's a lot broader than just kind of that narrow view. And I think that God can prepare us for missions through a lot of different ways. Really, our whole lives, I think God is always preparing us for what he has in store for us, what his calling is on our lives. But when I think about what it means to prepare for missions, and you could really apply this to any form of ministry, whether it's missions or otherwise, there's a parable that really jumps out to me. And that is what many people call the parable of the talents. This is one of the things that I talk about in this chapter of the book, if you read the book Pursuing the Call. And the parable of the talents, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the parable of the minas, it's found in two places in the Bible. It's found in Matthew 25 and it's found in Luke 19. And the story in both versions is a little bit different. There's some changes between how both authors record the story. In fact, that's part of the reason why it has two different names, even though the general storyline is essentially the same in both. But just kind of give a summary. And if you're somebody that's considering missions, you probably heard this story before. But in this story, there's a wealthy and powerful individual who's going to be going away on a journey. And he entrusts three servants with different levels of money, different levels of resources that belong to him, that he is trying to steward well, and that he wants to leave entrusted with these three servants as he's going away and doing what he's going to be doing in the meantime. And so each one of these servants receives a different amount of money, and two of the servants begin to put the money to work. They begin to make investments. The parable doesn't give the specifics of what they did with the money, but it says that they doubled the money that they had because they were using it wisely. The third servant, on the other hand, did not end up really doing anything with it. He buries the money because he's afraid of losing it or something happening to it, and he just leaves it sit, and that's it. And when we read through the parable, when the rich man, the powerful man who had entrusted the money to these servants, when he comes back from his journey, he gives the same exact response to the two servants that had done well with the money. And it's interesting is that they hadn't been entrusted with the same amount of money. They hadn't gained the same amount of money, but they both received the same well done. You guys did a good job. The third servant, however, the one that had buried this, he gets rebuked extremely harshly. And as the parable ends, the rich, powerful man who is representing God in the parable, he gives a greater level of responsibility to the two servants that had done well with the money. Instead of just putting them in charge of money, he puts them in charge of cities, and they get entrusted with more responsibility. The third servant, however, he doesn't get entrusted with more. In fact, the little bit that he does have, which was with the money that he had received, is taken away from him, and he's punished severely. So that's kind of a summary of the parable. Now, what does all this mean for us when we're thinking about preparing for missions? What I believe one of the key principles of this parable is that we need to be faithful in the little things before we can be faithful in the big things. Mm-hmm. In other words, we got to be faithful with whatever God has put in front of us in the here and now before we can expect God to give us bigger and greater assignments in the future. A lot of times, like I said, when we think about missions, we think of it, or preparing for missions, we think of it strictly in a cerebral sense. I'm going to read about missions. I'm going to maybe go to a Bible college and study missions and things like that. But the number one thing that you can do to prepare for missions is to get involved in ministry. The number one thing you can do to prepare for missions is to get involved in serving wherever you are. That is what's going to be the biggest thing that you can do to get involved in missions. And there's that biblical principle that as we're serving, little by little, God is going to take note of that, and he's going to continue to entrust us with greater and greater responsibility. And if we're not being faithful with the opportunities that we have in front of us, well, then we shouldn't expect those greater levels of responsibilities, like becoming a missionary to a foreign country, to just fall into our lap one day. It doesn't work like that. So that's there's a lot more I could say, but I know that that's a pretty good summary, I think, and I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, and I'm thinking there's two things I'm thinking when you're sharing this. One, I would have a hard time believing someone say, "Hey, I'm called to full-time missions," and then you go and observe their life in the church, and currently at this time they're not even serving, or they're putting God on the back burner. I'm sorry, I'm with Danny. I agree that it's going to be evident in your life, and we talked about in the other video that if you feel a passion for children, well, I mean, maybe you should be serving in your children's department at your church. If you have a passion for reaching out to youth in the foreign lands, well, maybe you should probably be active with the youth in your local church. And then also too, I think that you should be actively participating and taking advantage of opportunities to go to the mission field as well. So I just think it should be evident. I mean, you should be able to see somebody and say, "Hey, ministry is evident in their life." And then when they say, "Oh yeah, I'm called to missions," well, then to me, I think it would be evident as well. Now, another thing that I want to kind of share with is I'm 53 years old. I've known the Lord for the last 31 years. And from the beginning, my wife and I have been involved in serving our local church. I mean, that's just really our whole life has been prior to the mission field in 2013. And I can see not only in employment as far as in businesses that we've owned and so forth, I can see those stepping stones to the mission field. No, I have not attended Bible college and I have not attended studies of becoming a missionary, but I can truly say, as you've noted, things in my life has prepared me for the mission field. What I'm doing today, I did in the secular world, as far as in business, as far as in construction, as far as in, teaching and ministering in our local church and discipling and raising people up in the things of God. So, I can testify that, don't look at what God has brought you through and say, well, that's not prepared me for mission field, because I really believe it. In many cases, it has prepared you for the mission field. So, so I think that like you're saying, that there is a preparation, a spiritual preparation to go into the mission field, and it should be evident.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned that I think is a very good point is that regardless of what your walk of life has been, regardless of what your vocation has been, there is a place for you on the mission field. Really, whether you worked in business or in law or medicine or education, literally like anything that you've done, there's a way that can be used to reach people on the mission field. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that depending on what country you're going to as a missionary, it may even be essential for you to have that type of background, like mm-hmm. a skill you can offer other than just your Bible college degree. And that's not to belittle Bible colleges at all, but just kind of to give an example of what I mean by that. Here in El Salvador, where I am, I'm on what's known as a religious workers visa. And so if you were to come to El Salvador, you could have that Bible college degree and there's no problem whatsoever. But in some countries, there is no such thing as a religious workers visa, especially if it's a country that's hostile to missionaries or that doesn't want evangelism. And so for you to be able to get into that country and get a visa and have legal standing, it's not to say that you can't have a Bible college degree. You certainly could have studied theology, but you better have something that you're able to offer that's going to be able to land you a visa. And if there's not a religious worker visa, for example, in a lot of Islamic nations, you're not going to be able to go as a Christian missionary. You have to have something else that can serve as your ticket into the country.
I understand what you're saying about as far as, maybe not necessarily you'd be able to enter into a country based on a religious visa. There's a missionary that I know of. I don't want to mention what country he's doing work in, but it's interesting because he did not enter in based on religion. He entered in based on becoming an English teacher in the country. And then out of that, they opened up a restaurant in that community. And then in that, they were ministering to their employees. And then out of that, they began to minister to, I believe it was one of their friends or something like that, that was in the sex trafficking. So they entered into ministering to people in the sex trafficking and setting people free from that industry. So it's absolutely fascinating. Yes, he did have a Bible college degree, but again, it was he didn't enter in based on the fact that he had a Bible college degree. He entered in based on the fact that he was going to help teach English. So, it's just, and then another thing that you were saying that caught my attention is that, a lot of people get a perception of missions and they think, okay, well, orphanages, building churches, and they just kind of like, medical, and then they kind of limit. Well, the thing of it is don't limit what God can do with you in the mission field. There was a gentleman I was talking to Tegucigalpa. He actually manages their coffee farm. He's not quote unquote, a missionary, as in meaning ministerial type things, but he's managing the entire copy portion of their ministry that raises funds for the ministry. So, I mean, you could be sent there to do the accounting. You could be sent there to manage the NGO. There's all kinds of things that you could do that's not necessarily like hands-on ministerial type, biblical type, teaching biblical classes or something like that. But you might be just sent there to actually do accounting for a ministry or administrate a ministry. Maybe you're ministering the school. So you can't limit yourself in what God wants to do for you with you in the mission field.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some other things that you feel like as far as in preparation? Because, obviously there's religious type things that you need to do to prepare, but what are some things that maybe not necessarily, preparing as far as praying, reading, things like that? What are some other things that we could talk about?
Yeah. So obviously we already talked about the importance of getting involved in ministry. And I would add that if you feel called to a specific type of missions work, then the closer you can get to being involved in that type of ministry would be the ideal as far as helping you prepare. And so, for example, if you feel called to youth ministry overseas, get involved in youth ministry. If you feel called to church planning overseas, get involved in a church plant in your local community. If you feel called to medical ministry overseas, get involved serving at a medical clinic. Whatever you can do as far as serving is going to be incredibly beneficial for you. And the closer that you can get to what it is that you actually plan on doing overseas, the better. Other than that, I think that there are other steps that you can take to becoming a missionary or to preparing yourself to be a missionary. And so I mentioned that we may come back to the academic side of things. And so I think now is probably a good time to loop that in here. So if you are at a stage of life where you've already got your college degree, you really aren't going to be in a position to go back and spend another 4 years getting another degree, then you may not necessarily be in the best position to get a degree in ministry. But if you are not yet in college, if you're maybe a high school student or early on in college, you haven't chosen a major yet, I would recommend, if you feel called to missions, to go to a Christian college or Christian university, because even though you may not necessarily study missions, you could, but even if you study something else, you're going to be learning everything through the lens of a biblical worldview. And so the classes are going to be incorporating how could this skill set, how could this trade potentially be used for ministry? And it's going to get you thinking along those lines. So that's something that you can do for sure if you're somebody that's still at that stage of life where you're looking at colleges. If you're somebody that's already past that, even though you may not necessarily get a degree or go back to school officially, I would say that taking some time to research and study missions would still be helpful. Missiology is something that you could be reading on. Grab some books. Definitely, do some reading. I had a pastor that used to always say, "Readers are leaders," and I hated that saying because I hated reading.
Yeah.
But it stuck with me. And so, yeah, pick up some books. In my book, I have actually a list at the end of the book of several books that I really highly recommend regarding missions. And so that's definitely a resource that's available. But pick up some books, do some reading. I would add, talk to other missionaries. Like, make it a point to form relationships with people that you know who have been on the mission field or who are currently on the mission field.
Yes.
I can tell you without a doubt that some of the best pieces of advice that I received as far as things to do and things not to do when I became a missionary was from conversations one-on-one with people that I knew who were missionaries. And it wasn't even necessarily like a formal let me mentor you once a week type of thing. Just knowing the person, you have just the conversations that flow through everyday life that help you. And so you definitely want to get around people that have experience with missions and help, that can help you in that area. And then lastly, I would add that it's always a good idea to talk to your pastor, because your pastor may be able to help you in ways that you never even considered. Even if your pastor isn't somebody who has on hand experience in missions, there's a good chance that they know missionaries that they can connect you with. that they may be aware of missions training programs that are available through your church or your church network, and they can help you with that. And obviously, thinking really, really long term, your pastor is going to be somebody that's going to be pivotal for you as you're raising support, whether that's financial support, or even if you're somebody that is one of the few people who goes with an organization that provides a salary, you're still going to need prayer support, and your pastor is going to be pivotal in that. And so I would definitely say, as soon as you start to get that inkling that you may want to be a missionary, definitely bring that before your pastor and loop him or her in.
Okay. Well, I was sitting here thinking about, like you were saying, if it's important to get around other missionaries. I think of the scripture, iron sharpens iron. And I think it's very important. When I think about preparation for missions, I doubt that there's very many people that will go on a mission trip, in July of this year, and all of a sudden in December, they're on the full-time mission field. I don't think it, again, I'm not going to say that that's never happened, but I doubt that happens often. And I think it's 6 month, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year process. And I think that is probably a very key component as far as, getting around other missionaries, conversing with other missionaries. And, this has nothing to do with missions in the sense, but it's a good example. There's a YouTuber that he's like one of the best YouTubers out there. He's got like 60 million followers on YouTube. And they did an hour-long conversation with this guy. And it's just fascinating to listen to him, because he always just wanted to produce the best videos on YouTube. And that was just his answer. Everybody just like, what do you want to do? I want to produce the best YouTube videos on YouTube. And that was just his whole entire goal. He didn't have any other goal other than just producing the best videos. Well, one of the key components out of that whole entire thing was he friended other YouTubers, and they constantly conversed with each other. They constantly talked to each other. They were constantly critiquing each other's videos. He was just talking about how, like, he would just get done doing a video. He was so proud of it. He would send it to one of his YouTuber friends, and they would be just like, dude, that was horrible. That was horrible. You didn't do this, and you could have done this. You could have transitioned this. Because, a lot of people don't understand the work that goes behind a good quality video. I'm not just talking about YouTube, but I'm just talking about how it captivates and keeps people's attention throughout the whole entire process. And, it's like an art, it's a science behind it. And they would just constantly just not rip on each other, but just hone each other. So really just kind of taking that back to missions, I really think that's the same thing here, is that we need to allow iron sharpen iron. We need to, go out to the mission field, come back, do action, after action reports of conversing with other missionaries and saying, hey, this worked, this didn't work. This is what I felt like. This is the situation I went through. I believe by doing that, we will make ourselves better. And then the other thing too is preparation. To me, like we refer to, like, if you're part of doing youth, if you're part of doing children's ministry, well, why wait to get to the mission field to become the best missionary doing children's ministry? Why not do it now? Why not do that preparation work and honing your skills while you're in your, at your home church, and honing your skills of becoming a better children's minister, or a better youth minister, or a better teacher of the word, whatever it may be. You can hone your skills. And then something that we didn't talk about, it's going to be in this video series, but the other things that you got to prepare for is language. You got to prepare for the culture, and again, we kind of talked about it in some other videos. I'm still fascinated by the things I'm learning today about our culture. I was just talking to our employee today, and I was sharing with her about some of the things I learned in one of the other videos. I was talking to a gentleman about language. And I was just fascinated about the things that I've learned about the culture, and just thinking, man, for the last 8 years, I've been so rude, in meaning, you say you're from New Jersey and you guys are abrupt and kind of get to the point. I'm kind of the same way. I get to the point, if I enter into a room, I don't care about the other people in the room. I just want to go to the one individual that I need to talk to. I'm going to talk to him and walk out. Well, in this culture in Honduras, it's very rude to do that. They expect you to say hello to everybody, acknowledge everybody in the room, take that person off to the side, privately talk to them, walk out, and you acknowledge everybody as you're walking out. I've never done that. So I'm just saying, preparation for the mission field language, preparation for the mission field, understanding the culture. Because we talked about culture, we talk about the shock of culture and how, sometimes it can take months to get over that. But if you prepare and understand the culture more so, then you're going to be able to, it's going to be more of an ease into the culture versus being shocked by the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And coming back, one of the things that you said there that really grabbed my attention is why wait? Why wait? If you want to be in children's ministry, for example, I think that was the example that you used. Why wait till you're on the mission field to start becoming the best children's minister that you can? Why not do it at home? I think that sometimes we create an artificial distinction between doing ministry overseas and doing ministry at home. And don't misinterpret what I'm saying. There are definitely some significant differences between doing ministry overseas and doing ministry in your native culture. But at the same time, doing ministry has some similarities that carry over no matter where you are. And one of the examples that I use in the book that I think really kind of highlights this is the story of Paul. Paul is probably the most prominent missionary in the Bible, besides, you could argue, Jesus, of course. Yeah. But Paul is a super prominent missionary. And in Acts chapter 9, Paul is originally called by God. That's the chapter where he gets knocked upside his head as he's on the way to Damascus, and he's blind, and he hears the voice saying, Paul, why are you persecuting me? Like that's Acts 9 to kind of put you in context. And there's a verse in that chapter, actually when God is talking to Ananias and telling Ananias that he needs to go and pray for Paul. There's a verse there that says, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. That's verse 15 of Acts chapter 9. And so what we see is that right from the very beginning of Paul's time as a Christian, God already had the plan in place that Paul was going to be a missionary to the Gentiles. This was already something that was decided. But if we continue reading the story of Acts, what we find is that Paul does not immediately go to become a missionary to the Gentiles on day one of being a Christian. And we don't know exactly how much time passes, but we can piece it together somewhat from the events that we read in the Bible. So first of all, we know that in Galatians 1:18, Paul indicates that after his conversion, he didn't return to Jerusalem for 3 years. And then after he's in Jerusalem, it doesn't specify how much time he spends there, but we see in the end of Acts chapter 9 that he leaves the city and then goes back to his hometown of Tarsus. And then later on, Barnabas seeks him out. He brings him to the church at Antioch because the church at Antioch is becoming a kind of the new hub for the church as believers are fleeing Jerusalem due to persecution. And then in Acts 11:25-30 and Acts 12:25, we learn that Paul spent a year in Antioch before he then went back to Jerusalem. And only after he returns to Antioch after that trip to Jerusalem does he actually get set apart for his first missionary journey. Mm-hmm. Acts 13. So that's kind of a long summary of those chapters. But what we can say, combining the timeline of these events, is that probably at least 5 years passed between God's initial call on Paul's life and when Paul actually began his first missionary journey. Now, what is Paul doing during this time? Well, the 3 years that he spent prior to returning to Jerusalem is somewhat of a mystery, since that's mentioned in Galatians, but it's not included in the book of Acts. What we do see in the book of Acts, between the time of Paul's initial conversion and call to the start of his first missionary journey, is that Paul is actively serving the church wherever he's at. Sometimes it's in Antioch, sometimes it's in Jerusalem, but wherever he's at, he's always serving. And it was that serving that prepared Paul to do what he ended up doing in his first missionary journey and beyond. He had to be faithful in the small before he could be faithful in the big. And you may say, well, it's kind of an artificial distinction that you're making, Paul pre and post missionary, because really he's doing the same thing. When he's in Antioch, when he's in Jerusalem, and when he's in those other cities on his first missionary journey, it's pretty much the same thing that he's doing. But that's precisely the point. We don't need to create an artificial distinction between doing ministry overseas and doing ministry at home. Not to say that there aren't differences, because there are. But anytime that you're doing ministry, whether it's home, whether it's overseas, anytime that you're involved in ministry, that's going to prepare you to get further involved in ministry and to have further and greater responsibilities in ministry.
That's awesome. And then, obviously the parable of the talents, God will promote you. I'm not saying that, hey, going to the mission field is a promotion. Yes, it is. But I'm just saying, I don't want to say that in such a way like, look, I'm a missionary, I'm better than you. I'm just saying that, God will promote you as you're faithful and doing the little things that God has called you to do. And I think we need to be busy about doing that and looking for opportunities for preparation in our lives to do the work that God's called us to do in the mission field. And so, obviously there's so many things that we can look at in preparation. I think we kind of chewed on more so of the spiritual aspect, being involved in serving and so forth. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the logistical things here later in this video series. Preparing is fundraising. So that's another thing that you'll need to be actively involved in, and we definitely discuss that in great detail as well. So, there's a lot of spiritual things that we need to do to prepare. We need to allow God to walk us through that process, but also there's a lot of things that we need to do prepare, secularly, so to speak. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm just saying that logistically, there's things that we need to do to prepare, and we're definitely going to cover those as well. I just think that preparing for the mission field, we should be organized. I'm an organizer by nature. I love organization. I asked a guy the other day what his type of planner that he uses. I know that sounds like, who asked that question? I love planners. I love time management. And, I just like stuff like that. And so I just think that we need to be diligent in our planning process, because trust me, you don't want to go to the mission field just haphazardly hip shooting, get on the ground, and you're not even prepared. So we're definitely going to talk about that in the logistical part. So anyway, any other things before we close?
I think we've hit it all.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, hey, as always, it's great talking to you. You're definitely giving us a lot of insight, helping those people that's considering the mission field. And you and I are both missionaries. Before this video even started, we talked about, I asked you, do you feel like you're going to be heading back to the States anytime soon? And your answer is no. I mean, my life's here, and I can definitely say that my life's here as well. It's our heart to serve the people of the nations that God's put us in. And, really it's a joy and an honor and a pleasure to serve the Lord in the mission field. All right, brother. God bless you. It's nice talking to you, man.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right. You too.